To talk more about all of this from The Hague in the Netherlands is Alanna O'Malley. She is an expert on the United Nations and professor of global governance and wealth at Erasmus University. Thanks very much for being with us. So I want to ask you, first of all, about the point that was made there, that the criticism, one of the main criticisms of this board is that it would appear to be replacing the UN and other organizations that have provided aid and stability to Palestinians. What do you say to that?
So I think there's two immediate ways to look at this. The first one is that it's a positive that Trump is actually seeking to institutionalize US power through an international organization. So he's not asserting naked US power to either monitor the implementation of the ceasefire in Gaza or for wider purposes, but he wants to build an institution around that. So we should take that as a relatively good sign that institutions still matter to the US. But the obvious criticism is that this is a replication of a lot of the major functions of the UN. And if you look at the three principles on which this Board of Peace is based, it's about dependable governance, stability, and peace. So this is very, very, very close to the central purposes of the UN. So it is a threat to the viability and to the lasting kind of impact of the UN. But on the other hand, if you look at how this is organized in the way that you've just explained, it puts not only the US as the central and so far as we know only veto power in the middle, but it puts Donald Trump as a person and as a political leader at the center of this institution for life. So in many ways, it takes the negative parts of the UN, which are the way in which it protects and fosters US power in the world, and it just really creates an organization that's designed to perpetuate that. So it's a challenge to the UN in the sense that it's very similar in its purposes, but in its structure, it actually explodes the very worst features of the veto system.
What about the notion that, and we got into some of this with our correspondent a little bit earlier, that there seems to be very little mention of the Palestinians' role in all of this, of their institutions and how they are going to govern themselves, if at all. How problematic is that?
Look, it's extremely problematic because this idea came from implementing the ceasefire in Gaza and then creating a kind of an international stabilization force that would oversee the monitoring of how the ceasefire goes and then the kind of granting of authority to the Palestinians themselves. So there's no role not only for the Palestinian people, but also there's no mention here of sovereignty. There's no mention anywhere of political rights. And these are the very features that have, really been central to the pursuit of the Palestinian state and the pursuit of Palestinian statehood. So any ceasefire that proposes a solution that doesn't actually include the victims of the conflict isn't a stable basis for creating peace. So that's a huge problem. But beyond that, also, if you look at the kind of purposes of this Board of Peace, we don't see any mention of those fundamental principles of international law. There's no mention of sovereignty. There's no mention of human rights. We have this kind of nebulous term of dependable and lawful governance. But this is coming from a country that has shown blatant contempt for international governance and for international law and for its fundamental principles in the very recent weeks and months. So it's very hard to see how Palestinian people would benefit from an organization also that includes people like Netanyahu, because Israel has indicated their willingness to join this board, and other states and other figures such as former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, who has a controversial record, to put it mildly, in the Middle East. I see no real potential for the kind of rights of the Palestinians being protected by a board instituted in this way as it is proposed right now.
Yeah, a lot of unanswered questions, and it remains to be seen how this is going to play out. Alanna O'Malley, good to talk to you. Thanks very much for being with us.